My name is Steven Sater, and the Performing Arts Department taught me everything. It taught me how to become the person I am.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the PAD Podcast. My name is Rob Morgan. I teach design at Washington University in St. Louis, and I am so freaking excited to share with you this episode where I interview Grammy Award-winning, Olivier Award-winning, and Tony Award-winning author and lyricist Steven Sater. I want to say Steven freaking Sater. Joined me for the podcast. I'm very, very lucky to have had some time to talk to him and talk to him about his origin story at WashU. You are not going to want to miss this episode. So, without further ado, enjoy. All right, my guest today is Steven Sater, a noted and award-winning author and lyricist. I'm so delighted to have you join the PAD podcast, Steven. Can I call you Steven?
Yes, please call me Steven. Yeah, I don't like, I knew Stephen Sondheim a bit, and he would be angry that I just said that. He was Steve, and if people called him Steve, he corrected them, and I'm the opposite. People always, not always, but often assume a certain familiarity with me and call me Steve, and I hate Steve. I'm very Steven, so that's 100%.
Understood. Steven from henceforth will be Steven. Full disclosure, you and I crossed paths a number of years ago. I want to say maybe 8 years ago. We did your production of Spring Awakening in our department. And I'm not sure if you had an opportunity to see that show, if you maybe visited slightly after that. But I'm so delighted to have you join the podcast and talk a little bit about your WashU experience. Yeah. So if you could kind of start, I guess, from the beginning, a little bit of Steven Sater's origin story. You grew up in Indiana, as I recall.
Up in Evansville, Indiana, yeah. And I remember when I first knew about WashU at all, because my sister was applying to colleges, and my parents took her on a tour, and I happened to be there when they went to WashU, and I thought I was so awed by the campus. And, at the time, I suppose it was a different era. I excelled in high school, and I had like a friend who went to Harvard, but almost everyone just went to Indiana University, which I knew I wasn't going to do. And I think I only applied to WashU. And maybe I'm wrong about that. Oh, I also applied to Stanford, and I got into both.
Wow.
And it just kind of made more sense. Oh, and I applied to Carnegie Mellon as an actor, and my parents wouldn't let me go there because I had asthma, and they said the air quality was too bad in Pittsburgh. So I chose WashU, and I have to say it was one of the informing choices of my life.
Wow.
I can tell you why. I'm getting a little emotional, but as you mentioned to me earlier, yes, when I was the very end of my sophomore year, as I was sort of wrapping up final papers, I woke up to a fire. My apartment was on fire. I was living on Pershing, which is sort of near the
at that time. I live on Pershing.
Do you?
Pershing's right there.
Campus?
We're the 7100 block of Pershing, so we're just a little west of campus. But yeah.
I think I was on Pershing. I could be wrong. Is that just like sort of a block?
Yeah, only a block or so north of campus, yes.
At the time, it was such a tenement area, and I didn't have a car, and we moved off campus at the beginning of my sophomore year. And in any event, I had a secondhand steer. I woke up and my apartment was on fire. That's what happened.
My God.
And I was trapped in the fire. And it's a long story, but I ended up being forced out on a third-story balcony because the third-story sort of porch had a big porch.
Sure.
Because the fire was coming toward me. And people yelled out from below, just stay there. The fire department is on its way. And a minute later, I stayed there. And a couple minutes later, the glass of the French door sort of burst out at me. And my robe, I had awakened and pulled on a bathrobe, and the robe went up in flames, that I was on flames.
Oh my God.
And someone screamed jump, which I'll always remember and be thankful they did, because I think I just might have died. And I climbed up on a ledge and just jumped off.
Wow.
And so I fell like 3.5 stories, and I landed on the concrete. And So I was very, I think I shattered and fractured a total of like 13 vertebrae,
Oh my
and
Lord.
I broke my arms and my wrists, and I was all burned.
Oh,
And
horrifying.
yeah, it was a horrific episode. And we later learned that the fire department, it was such a low rent district that the local fire department had been closed down, and they had to wait for the fire department to come from Clayton.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
so in any event, I was laid up, and
How long were you
it
in the
happened
hospital after that?
months.
Wow.
I was in one hospital, and they had to move me to Barnes.
Hmm.
I remember when I got to Barnes, the care I had received honestly was so bad they had to like re-break my wrists and like everything had to be redone.
Oh,
Was not great.
I'm so sorry.
Um, but it so happened that my advisor at that time, whose name was Herb Metz, who ran the drama department,
Yes. Mhm.
his partner at the time, David Belmont, was running the classics department.
Ah,
And he had said to me, and Herb knew me well, and I had a great affectionate rapport with William Gass, who was great to me.
hmm.
Um, in fact, whom I owed one of the papers that was still due. And I,
Brief interruption here to say that William Howard Gass was an American novelist, short story writer, essayist, critic, and former philosophy professor at Washington University for many years.
Herb said to me, with your love of the classics, you know, David Belmont had written the first sort of how to learn ancient Greek book in 45 years.
Hmm.
And I think Herb was just trying to solicit more students for his class, is the reality. But he said to me, with your love, you should really learn Greek. And so I had enrolled for it. And I was laid up, I was on this bed, it was called a striker frame, which is like an ironing board that was turned every 2 hours. So I was turned from my back to my stomach every 2 hours.
Oh,
My arms were propped up on the side because they were in casts.
oh my goodness.
And one night at like either 2 or 4 a.m., this nurse who was a nun said to me, God saved you for a reason. And even though I don't know that I believed in God, it just went through my body. And I thought I had spent this semester, I was studying James Joyce and Ulysses. And I'd spent the semester, I'd written this paper that was like my summa. I'd written like, I'm going to do to the Ulysses what Joyce did to the Odyssey. And I wrote a paper about my English professor and me, and going through this day. And it had burned up, and he hadn't kept any record of it.
Wow.
And I thought I have to, and I've been acting so much, and I thought I have to bind myself to things that are more permanent.
Hmm.
I want to write things that can last.
Hmm.
This determination in the middle of the night in a striker frame in Barnes Hospital.
Yeah.
And I reached out to Herb, and I got a copy of David's How to Read Ancient Greek book, How to Learn Ancient Greek. And I had them make a page turner. I could turn pages with my teeth.
Oh my God.
My stomach. And I had glasses also on my back that would reflect it up. So I had two different page turners, both
Wow.
rated by teeth. And I said, there's no TV, no videos. I'm going to learn.
Wow.
And I taught myself ancient Greek, and I read like 85 novels, and it transformed me.
Hmm.
And there would just be no spring awakening. Let me say that. Let me cut to that. If
Wow.
I were not immersed in the form of Greek tragedy, I wouldn't have known the choruses of ancient Greek tragedy were what inspired the form of the songs in Spring Awakening. That, and in turn, monologues of 20th century fiction like a James Joyce.
Hmm.
So that's directly from WashU. And it's so funny. Just as we were doing this Zoom, I didn't set this up for the Zoom. I found right here, there are two of them. This is my copy of the Iliad that I studied at WashU.
Oh my
And it's
goodness.
with me all the time. I take it with me in my hand luggage.
Wow.
And it's this old Greek text.
Sure. Sure.
And what can I say to you? It's
Ah,
it's become the foundation, the liberal education I received at WashU, in conjunction with my ability to do play after play after play in the performing arts department, which I did, um, really made me, I mean, it just became the foundation for my life.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I hate to use this comparison, but like a phoenix, you rose from the ashes.
Yeah.
You know, it isn't until you hit rock bottom and whatever prompted that, you know, some
Yeah.
people personally, I went through a divorce and I felt like I'd hit rock bottom, but you know, you've had this horrific tragedy happen to you and laying on a hospital bed, you decide to take this upon yourself to do. It's so inspiring and so, I mean, extraordinary that as that you said it was a nurse or a nun said to
Yeah.
you,
Both. Yeah. I mean, she
you
was
know,
one person, but she was
sure.
both functions.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew I've obviously been researching a bit about you before this podcast, but I didn't know the details of that, and so grateful to hear that story and to you know, obviously that you came out of it okay. Quite
Yeah.
okay. As a Olivier Award winning and Grammy Award winning and Tony Award winning author, you know, you've
Yeah.
it's just amazing that that's kind of where your journey began in a sense. If I'm not putting words
100%
in
it
your
is.
mouth. Yeah.
100% it is.
What other at while you were at WashU, what other interests besides those besides were you majoring or minoring in some combination of things?
Yeah, I had a major in drama and English literature and a
Mhm.
minor in classics.
I see.
It's kind of
Gotcha.
what happened.
Sure, 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 sure. And
It's what I
so,
folded.
so keep the story going. So I assume, you know, repaired yourself over many months,
Well,
as you
yeah, it
said.
took a long time, and then I was in a back brace for some time.
Wow, wow,
And yeah, I was in taking studying ancient Greek in a back brace, and then I moved to Homer for my last year.
wow.
And then I felt that I became very studious at that time, as you just heard. And I thought I really only have 2 years of proper sort of liberal arts education. I'm going to apply. I only applied to sort of Princeton and Harvard.
Hmm.
Yeah, I applied to Yale. I did um, for graduate school in literature. Otherwise, I'm moving to New York to pursue acting.
Hmm.
Because I was sort of like the star of my college, shows.
Sure.
And the I got in to
Wow.
Princeton. And so and my parents, neither of whom had really gone to college, they were so moved. And so it sort of determined it. So I went to Princeton. And and I had this very intense and rigorous training in English literature, which I loved, and I loved every part of it. And I met people there who, like people I met at WashU, have remained like guardians in my life. And,
Certainly.
then I was in a PhD program, and I at a certain point it becomes sort of like training to become an academic, to become a
Sure.
professor. And I'm so overachieving by nature. I just knew that I would want to be writing. I could just feel it in myself. I would want to get on a tenure track at an Ivy League school. I would want to be writing, leading works of literary criticism. I thought, I'm never going to write poetry. I'm never going to write the plays I want to write. I'm gonna, I'm not going to fulfill my vow. That's how I saw it, that I had made a vow.
Right. Wow.
So I have only one person in my family who's remotely connected to anything like literature, and he was an eminent director in London, theater director.
Oh,
And I asked him for help, and he wrote me a number of introduction letters, like maybe a dozen, and he sent them to me. And as I was walking to the last day of my master's exams, I just put them in a mailbox so that I couldn't turn back. And so but I forgot to write down who they were. And so I only heard from like two people, two or three, and he couldn't remember who he'd written them to. So then I heard from a couple, but that led to my first job in New York. She became my first agent.
oh,
And her son is now like the architect of my building. He I mean, he works as the resident architect for the building.
sure.
But I went to work for her, and she kept me afloat for years because she also this is why we won't say who it is, but she also paid me off the books for a while so that I could just do work for her. And I
Sure.
could always just work for her and write through the night.
Wow. Hmm.
And I don't know I can talk about this. Here's what I would say. It's the first play I wrote when I left graduate school, which is modeled on a Greek tragedy of Aeschylus. I can say that.
Mhm.
Um, I am working on right now.
Wow.
Yeah, I had had
That's
a time
cool.
when I was in Paris when I was like 30. Then I was crazy. I was always crazy, but I would like only speak French and only read ancient Greek. And anyway, I wrote this version of the play again then, and then I haven't looked at it since then. And I'm actually immersed in it right now. So Greek has stayed with me, as obviously has theater.
Yeah. And also a bit of a full circle moment in a way, would you
It is.
say? Yeah, yeah.
And it is.
That's fascinating. I think that I often think about things that are sort of put on the back burner of our brains,
Yes.
suddenly pop up again and later in life.
My mother passed away a year ago in October,
Oh, my
and she
condolences.
told me there's so many brilliant things you did when you were younger, and I one day you should go back to some of those. And I thought, wow.
Hmm.
So
Interesting. It's
there
funny.
it
I tell students they often seem to think sometimes that their youth is a liability, that
is.
that they're young and they're just starting out and they're just this. And I'm like, but that's a feature, not a bug, that you don't know what you don't know. And you take big swings at life and you don't know that it's a big swing because you don't have a context for it, and there was a time, at least I can recall, when everything I owned fit in my Jeep. And there was
Yeah,
something really liberating about that I could go anywhere. I didn't have a mortgage or
yeah,
a full-time job anywhere. And I'm like, maybe I want to move to fill in the blank.
yeah, yeah. I as you know, work a lot with young people, have a lot of shows that
Yeah.
feature young casts, and I probably feel most at home with them and
Hmm.
most. And I feel what I always feel when young people come into an audition is that they bring the future into the room,
Hmm.
and that's what's so exciting about it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to sense the future in someone and help sort of bring it forth from them
Certainly.
is,
Yeah.
is like a major task for me.
As a phrase, I love that. Bring the future into the room. Every class I teach, I feel like, I want the students to speak for their generation, whatever they're putting together, if it's a small play, if it's,
Yeah,
a final project of some sort. It's like, I don't care to know what my generation thinks. I want to know what your generation is thinking and
yeah,
feeling and everything
yeah.
else. Can you talk a little bit about your creative process, is there a routine to your schedule? I think I heard John Prine tell a story once about writing a song, and he's like, we wanted to be like super serious about it, so we woke up at 10 a.m. on a Monday morning and just started to write. And
Oh,
he said,
wow.
and then that didn't work.
Oh, I
You know,
see.
so I mean, you've had the remarkable opportunity to work with some of the most amazing collaborators, Burt Bacharach, Duncan Sheik, Michael
Yeah,
Bublé. Like,
yeah,
is there something, what I find fascinating is about the creative processes, it doesn't matter if it's an architect or a lyricist like yourself, that do you find that there's similarities or differences between your process and the process of others?
I can't speak across fields. I mean, I've always felt that poetry was very akin to painting,
Uh-huh.
but I like to work in a solitary way. I'll say that.
Sure.
So part of what really suits Duncan, like I never aspired to be a lyricist. I never thought about writing lyrics particularly.
Hmm.
I never wanted to write musicals, A, because they weren't my favorite thing. B, because I worked so hard. I worked so relentless. Since that time in the hospital, I've kind of lived my life like I was on borrowed time.
Yeah.
So I would say the main thing about my process is that I'm relentless, that I'm kind of always in it. And if I'm in cars, if I'm on planes, if I'm waiting in doctor's offices, I have earplugs that I take with me, and I have pencils. I work with pencils.
Sure.
So I have like a bag of sharpened pencils that I
I
take
love it.
and earplugs. So I just kind of am in this mode a lot.
Sure.
Um, I'm
With
also a
with the
Buddhist.
copy of the Iliad in your bag.
I have the Iliad, yeah, when I travel always. I chant. And so I chant morning and evening, and chanting really invigorates me, and I have insights. To say that when you chant, you bring forth the mind of the Buddha. You sort of bring out your wisdom. And then when you act on that wisdom, it's like the body of the Buddha. The
Hmm.
Buddha meaning the awakened one, not the Buddha, not a Buddha outside yourself,
Sure.
but part of yourself that's awakened to who you really are,
Right.
that
Right.
knows your mission and goes for it. So I think that because I chant and just focus so much, I'm kind of in touch with, I can just write
Yeah.
a lot of the time. And it's not that I don't, and then I rewrite relentlessly, forever. At work on everything of mine has taken forever. Um, Not of my choosing, but that's just how it's been.
Of course.
And so I think like Duncan, part of what's kindred spirit about us is that we both like a solitary process.
Hmm.
So we're not at all like sitting down at the piano. We're not even in a room together. I write a lyric. By and large, he sets it verbatim. And I used to fax them to him. Now I email them to him. We do see each other. We're close friends.
Sure.
We'll hang out, but we never discuss shop in that way. I might give him a lyric, and sometimes, and these are great experiences. He'll read through it for the scansion and sort of the feeling of it when we're together. That doesn't happen a lot, but it's happened a number of times. We've been away at retreats together. We're in the same house, but it tends to be he's in one room working on something that I've given him. I'm in another room working on something else. Then he'll play it for me.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have conversations about it. Bert was different. Bert, is old school songwriting,
Hmm.
but Bert also, and Michael Bublé also, it was lyrics first. Like I
Hmm.
gave them the lyrics. Bert would set the song. Bert, unlike Duncan would, he would, you would go to his house. He would have the physical copy you had physically handed him. He would write bars of music across the page, and you would sit at the piano, sometimes for hours, and he would play it. And he would pull out, when we got to a good place, he had a cassette deck that he had from Crazy Eddie's, and he would record himself into a cassette deck, boxes of cassettes of Bert singing to me. And
Wow.
he would be like, set this part verbatim and then say, I hear this thing. And he'd start singing something into the cassette deck. And I would take that home and translate it into digital information and write words to it.
That's
Um,
amazing.
so I have different processes with different people, different directors, different.
Sure.
I do have a lot of amazing partners.
Sure.
Yes.
There's a photographer I follow and I'm a dedicated follower of named Norman Seeff, who sort of not only took photos of famous artists, Ray Charles, for example, and others, but he also took the opportunity to kind of disarm. His photos are very genuine, and they have a sense that he somehow disarmed his subject in a way that the authenticity comes through the photo. And
Uh-huh.
is and one thing that pops up quite a bit in these interviews, he's thankfully recorded them as well, is the fear. Does fear come into play? Do you fear the blank page the way I might as a designer
No,
fear the empty model box?
no,
No.
you're a blank page at all. That's my friend. But I have fear, but not about writing.
Hmm.
I don't feel that. I have this show called Murder at the Gates. It's a new musical that I was
Yes.
just workshopping, and I've been working on it for years. And we have great producers. Like we're finally on a really good track. There's a lot going forward for it.
Wonderful.
So we just got notes, and I found a lot of them uncomprehending
Hmm.
and facile. That's not unusual, but I did, and there were an
Sure.
unusual volume of notes.
Right.
And I got like I knew for a day and a half I couldn't look at them because I glanced at the beginning. My
Yeah.
assistant had read them right away, which was responsible. I
Yeah.
didn't. Then finally it was like, okay, I better start going through these notes. I got so worked up after like a page and a half. I thought I can't read these until my director is immersed in rehearsal right now in another show. I can't get his attention. I'm gonna have his attention, but like not for another 10 days.
Right.
So I can't read them
Hmm.
because I'll get too upset about them. And
Hmm.
I'll be panic stricken about the conversation, how to do it. I was with a friend, my friend Jesse Nelson, who's one of my partners, who wrote Alice by Heart with me and directed it, and we have movies together. Um, she said at your stage of your life, she said, just don't worry about this at all. You can do this and just refer to just play. So like play your status, it's do the, when I
Certainly.
know that this appeals to you, but what I learned at Spring Awakening, blah, blah, blah. But so yes, I can be panic stricken and upset and anxious and things like that, but not about writing. Writing is who I am. Like that's
Wow. Yeah.
no, no.
Nice. Nice. You mentioned earlier, I'd love to touch on this, that you always thought poetry was like painting. Can you explain a little bit about what you
Oh, I
mean by
really do
that?
think that.
In
Um,
what way is it like painting?
well, the pictura poesis is the phrase of Horace that it's like poetry is like painting. Painting
Hmm.
is like poem. That they're I suppose they are records of the what does Wallace Stevens say? The evasions of the mind in its own poetry is like the mind reflecting on it, its self-evasion in some way.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really, and you're touching this, and painting is like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm someone who spent a lot of time with painting. I spent a lot of time in museums. I spent a lot of time reflecting on paintings.
Hmm. Hmm. It,
Um, I don't know. It's so solitary and it's so expressive and it allows so many viewpoints within a contained space.
yeah. Yeah. My wife works at the St. Louis Art Museum and sometimes she catches herself in a sense complaining and she's like, what am I complaining about? I get to walk by Monet's water lilies on the way to my office. Like I
Mhm.
think that's incredible. I often talk to my design students in a sense that they read a play or maybe they read Spring Awakening. They maybe get a little overwhelmed by the scope of it and where do you
Oh,
begin? Where do you
really?
start? And
How do they
I'm
create their own thing?
what's that?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yes.
Sure, sure. I often compare it to painting in the sense that you start with the sky and then you work your way forward, that then there's the trees and the bushes and the rabbits and the squirrels, like they I try to make sure that they broad brushstroke a volume and then begin from there, and it may
I think you start with something inside you.
hmm,
Like, I think of when I look at Monet's water lilies, I don't just think of the light of the sun,
hmm,
through the water. To me, it's about optics and the way the it's about his it's about the truth of him
sure.
and how his mind came to naming, how his mind came to the process of absorbing what it sees and selecting what it presents.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Interesting.
so I think writing for me is, first of all, it's auditory. Um, I hear something and it is insistent in some way, or it's seductive in some way, and I know to follow it.
Hmm.
And if I'm in a structured form, I examine it,
Hmm.
and it's not just like I let it lead me. So that's what I'm saying. It's not that. It's there's a self-examination that goes on with it,
Hmm.
but also you have to kind of trust what your deeper self is presenting to you.
Certainly.
You have to explore it.
Right, right. You have
To
to
learn.
maybe, would you say, give something of yourself,
Yeah,
that you have to put yourself in the piece. The aforementioned other Steve, Steve Sondheim, he
yeah.
said he said content dictates form. Would you agree with that?
Very sort of, 70s thing to say. You know what I mean? Wasn't that Marshall McLuhan and all those people? I think the inner demand of what must be said, mandates a form.
Certainly.
I don't, I mean, obviously my writing is so different from his, but also here's what I have to say about Steve. He was so extraordinarily generous to me in all my encounters with him. And many writers feel that, younger writers.
Sure.
But we had such diametrically opposed views on certain matters about lyric writing. And whenever he would host panels, he would invite me to be part of them
Hmm.
because I think he liked having a different
Right.
perspective represented. But I think that the what you feel when you read Sondheim is how conscious, how thought out everything is, and
Hmm.
how literal everything is. And it's so rare that there's a metaphor like the clowns, which is not really a metaphor, but it's a metaphor set in the clouds. Um, Whereas I come from poetry. So
Sure.
he felt insistently that because you're in theater and the musical theater, a lyric has to be completely accessible on first listening, and it has to tell, everyone has to be able to, and I don't agree with that at all. In other words, I think if you look at Hamlet, if you look at the Water Lilies, if you
Hmm.
look at Da Vinci, like great art, it's not that it's enigmatic on purpose. It's not that it's obscure. It's that it holds a lot of truths.
Mm.
And the more you read Hamlet, the more you attend a performance of Hamlet, the more it reveals itself to you. I feel this about the Iliad and the works that I've spent my lifetime with. And I think
Certainly.
there's a reason why they are still with us centuries later, that some of the essential questions about what it means to be human being are posed, and someone with a mind and someone sick at the state of the human situation are posed more eloquently than they've ever been in Hamlet. So that's how I see the mission of poetry and of lyrics and of plays,
Sure.
that you want to touch something fundamental to the human spirit, and you want to articulate questions that still linger, that have been with us, from the beginning. I remember when I was talking at WashU, two things I talked about were I talked about the end of La Recherche du Temps Perdu, Proust's long work, and he talks about looking back on his life on stilts of time, that his past was never separated from him, but it also became who he was in some
Hmm.
way.
Yeah.
And that sense of vertigo when you look back on your own life. And I aligned that with this statement of Borges, whom I read through William Gass, and about the world being a library. And there was a book in the library that contained all the other books.
Mm.
And I thought that's what literature is,
Hmm.
and that it's incumbent on, I have a novel now, I've worked on it for years. It's incumbent on the novel to contain sort of the wisdom of novels, like the tradition of novels. We work in an oral tradition, and theater is no different from that. It's you are still attending a rite of Dionysus. You're still coming for a cultural catharsis. I don't think that's how most theater makers approach what they do. And I don't think that's necessarily the intent of what most commercial theater is. But I do think that the works that are enduring respect and honor that, and live off that same energy. When you see, I'm going to see An Enemy of the People by Ibsen tonight. I learned about Ibsen through Herb Metz. The the Greeks are alive in it, and so is what's going on right now, with the fascist movement in this country. I mean, that's just how it is, and the system of disinformation and the slander. So if you don't, I think you have to bring the past to bear. Spring Awakening is all about that. Like, if you don't look at where lying and deception and suppression of the truth from younger people gets us, then you haven't learned the lesson of history.
Yeah.
So I think the past is, at the least, at step one, is a lens for us, is a metaphor for how we understand ourselves, but it also informs what we are.
I believe H.G. Wells said that civilization is a race between education and catastrophe.
Yeah.
And I feel like that what you've just said sums that up quite nicely. We must learn from history, as you did, beginning right here in St. Louis, Missouri,
Yeah.
at WashU. I'm just so grateful, Stephen, that for your time and for your candor about your time at WashU. It's a real treat. I've had a lot of colleagues thank me for doing this podcast, and actually, I'm like, no, this is a real treat to talk to someone like yourself, and I'm just so in awe of your career and your trajectory from literally a burning building
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
So
Here.
so thank you for that. Yeah, I'm at a loss for words with someone whose job it is to craft words. I'm very, very grateful to you. I'm just so blessed to be able to talk to you today. And I'm not a
Oh,
religious person myself either, to be honest, but I really appreciate the candor and the window into your process. That just fascinates me as well. So thank you. Thank you for your time. And
great.
yeah, have a good luck on your future projects. Can't we just see what comes next? And thanks again.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank
Thank
you,
you for your
Stephen.
time. Okay. Bye
Bye.
bye.
All right. My many, many thanks to Stephen Sater for joining me on the podcast. I am so delighted he said yes when I reached out to him. So if you would like to be a guest on the podcast and you are an alum of PAD or PAD adjacent, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to interview you. And yeah, that's it. Have a great rest of your day and look for the next episode very soon.